There's a mountain in West Virginia that the state will tell you has never had a mining accident. Not one. Not ever. A perfect safety record, over 90 years. And here's the part that should bother you. Subscribe to our channel for untold American folklore. The town built right on top of that mountain's hollow has a cemetery with 41 unmarked graves dug in a single week. The record says nothing happened. The ground says something different. This is Cursed Ground, Episode 3. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why the safest mine in West Virginia history is also the one nobody from that town will go near. Most people assume mining disasters get reported. Headlines, inquiries, memorials. That's how it's supposed to work. But here's what they don't tell you in the official histories. For most of the 20th century, coal companies didn't just own the mines. They owned the town, the newspaper, the doctor, and the county coroner. There are mountains in this country, you can drive past them right now, where something happened underground so costly to admit, so financially ruinous for the company that owned everything above it, that it simply never appears in any surviving record. No inquiry. No headline. No names. But the hollow remembers in other ways. Wells that ran dry overnight, on the same week every account says, nothing happened. A section of the mountain that subsided so gradually, over decades, that nobody could ever explain it as anything but coincidence. And when you ask the families who've lived there for 5 generations why their kin won't set foot past the old mine gate, they change the subject before you finish the question. I'm not here to tell you the mountain is haunted. I'm here to show you something worse, a disaster erased so completely that the only proof left is a cemetery with too many graves and not enough names. And when you understand how a company makes 90 men disappear from the record without a single line in a single newspaper, you'll understand why the ground still won't settle. The year is 1924. A coal company town, we'll call it Kettle Knob, sits in a steep hollow in the southern West Virginia coal fields. About 600 people. Almost all of them employed, housed, and paid in company scrip by the same mining company. The mine was considered one of the most productive in the region. It was also, according to a single surviving inspector's note from a neighboring county, ventilated well below acceptable standard for a mine of its depth. Now, when a coal company owns the mine, the houses, the store, and the local paper, it also tends to own the explanation for whatever happens underground. What the company's official annual report doesn't mention, what a retired federal mine inspector's personal notebook, discovered by his grandson in 2014, actually describes, is a methane buildup in the lower seam that the company had been warned about twice in writing. On the night of November 14, 1924, that seam collapsed. The company's own internal telegram, never filed with any state office, puts the number of men working that section at 91. The state's official mining fatality count for Kettle Knob that year reads 0. Within a year of the collapse, the reports began, not to the company, but among the families. First, the cemetery. 41 graves were dug in the company cemetery in a single week that November. Not dead. Just, never accounted for in any company ledger as deceased. The headstones, where they exist at all, list no cause and no date. The families called it influenza, because that's what the company told them to call it. Second, the wells. 6 wells on the lower end of town ran completely dry within 48 hours of the collapse. Not slowly. Overnight. A hydrogeologist consulted decades later, during a 1980s land survey, said the pattern of well failure matched a sudden underground pressure release, consistent with a large cavity opening somewhere beneath the water table. He wrote in his report, and I'm paraphrasing here, the geometry suggests a void of significant size was created abruptly, and has not since been mapped. Not since being mapped. You understand what that means. There's a recording, the original is held in a regional folklife archive, of a former Kettle Knob miner named Garrett Holt, interviewed in 1951 as part of a labor history project. He says, on tape, that he lost his older brother and 2 cousins, the night the low seam went. He says the company sealed that section of the mine within 72 hours, before any outside inspector arrived. He says the company doctor signed 41 death certificates that same week, all listing the same cause. And this is his exact phrase, pneumonia, every single one, in November, in a town with no recorded outbreak. 41 cases of pneumonia. In 1 week. In one town. That's not a man describing a folktale. That's a man describing the only cause of death the company would let him write down. Now here's what I want you to actually take from this. Because this isn't just a spooky story, this is a pattern. 1. Cursed ground is almost always erased history. Every site we cover on this series shares one thing: something happened there that someone powerful didn't want remembered. In a company town, powerful usually means the same entity that controlled the records, the doctor, and the newspaper. 2. The land holds physical evidence longer than paperwork does. Well, failures. Subsidence patterns. Unmapped voids underground. Modern geology can read a hollow like a document, even 90 years later. What the company erased from the ledger, the ground kept recording anyway. 3. The oral histories that survive are rarely exaggerated. We tend to dismiss mining town folklore as exaggeration passed down by grieving families. But oral history projects were often the only record-keeping available to communities whose official documentation was controlled by the very company responsible. When a miner says he watched 41 men get buried under the same false cause of death, he wasn't being dramatic. He was correcting the record the only way he could. 4. The pattern of unmarked graves is the real evidence. Kettle Knob's company cemetery has 41 stones with no names, dug in a single week, in a town whose total annual death rate in any other year never exceeded 6. When a single week produces 7 times a town's typical yearly toll. That's not an epidemic. That's data. 5. Calling it pneumonia instead of the collapse is how it persists. The most dangerous thing about a buried mining disaster isn't the collapse itself. It's the decision, made by people with the authority to write the certificates, to call 91 dead men a flu season. Pneumonia. Natural causes. No incident on record. Every time we accept the company's version, we participate in the erasure. And the mountain keeps its silence. Until someone finds the telegram. Kettle Knob's mine was never reopened. The company quietly ceased operations there in 1933, citing depleted reserves, despite internal estimates showing decades of coal still in place. The cemetery was never formally surveyed by the state until 1988, when a road widening project required it. The survey confirmed 41 graves. It could not confirm 41 identities. No memorial was built. No company record was ever amended. The county death index for November 1924 still lists influenza outbreak, mild, as the only notable event. But here's the thing about a buried mining disaster. It doesn't need a headline to make itself known. In 2017, a small engineering survey team mapping abandoned mine voids for a state safety initiative ran ground-penetrating radar over the lower seam beneath Kettle Knob. They found a cavity nearly 400 feet long, never previously logged on any company or state map. 2 of the survey's sensors failed within that same 400-foot stretch. The lead engineer's final note in the project file reads simply, "Recommend resurvey, equipment behaved inconsistently with prior calibration." He didn't specify what that meant. The mine gate is still locked. And somewhere in a county courthouse in southern West Virginia, there's a death index from November 1924 with 41 names and 1 cause of death, side by side, in the same handwriting. This is episode 3 of Cursed Ground. Every episode in this series investigates a real location. Real coordinates, real records, real history. That someone decided you didn't need to know about. If this is the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, subscribe. Because we're just getting started. Episode 4 of Cursed Ground drops next week. And this one goes back further than any site we've covered yet. Drop a comment below, tell me if there's an old company town near you. I'll bet it has a story nobody's written down. I'm serious. They're everywhere.